Okay, so now let's spend a little bit of time talking about the different ways that land use regulation are actually implemented. So the first are zoning ordinances. These are basically the categories of types of use that a city planning office is going to kind of split the city up into. So, for example, there's going to be residential zoning, there's going to be commercial zoning, industrial, agricultural, and then mixed use, which is going to kind of combine different uses together. Uh, a common example of mixed use is like when you have like a 5 or 6 story building where the first story is going to be like retail space or like shops, and then above that are apartments. That's an example of mixed use. So the zoning ordinances are gonna basically uh, define what you can do with the particular parcel of land, depending on what zone it falls into, as per the city's plan. So I think instead of describing this in words, let's look at an example of a zoning map and then kind of the zoning ordinance as to which basically specifies what you can do with that particular parcel that's in that zone. So if you look here, this is Oakland. You can see this is kind of near the downtown area. There's a bunch of different zones that exist. So each of these is kind of like its own little zoning designation. So CBD, that stands for Central Business District. That's a specific kind of zone. So you can see CBDC, CBDP. So let's look at the actual ordinance. If we look in the city of Oakland's kind of code of laws, they're going to have a section on the zoning regulations. And so you can see if you look at Central Business District, this is you're going to see all these different zoning designations. The CBD Central Business District zones, the law is gonna specify kind of what they are kind of allowing you to do with that particular zone and some of the other kind of use specifications for this zoning designation. So you can see here the CBD key allows all uses that are specified by this zone. The CBDC, is only going to allow certain activities, and you have to get a use permit, a conditional use permit, which is basically a special approval from the city to use your parcel for a specific purpose. And then L, it looks like it's a limited use. Okay, so you can see here are all the CBD sub designations here, and then here are kind of the uses that you can do. Okay, so residential, permanent residential care. You can see administrative, commercial activities, food sales. So, these are all the different uses that are kind of allowed, and it's going to also say kind of what if you need a conditional use permit, etc. So sorry, I think these up here are actually related to this coding here. So if your property is in a CBDR, I'm assuming this stands for residential. You can see that you can basically use that uh, that parcel for housing. If it's a residential care, you'll need some kind of permit for that, or there's some limitation, I guess. If it's an emergency shelter, you'll have to get a special conditional use permit for that. So you can see all these different kind of sub zoning is gonna kind of it's gonna list here what you have to do to be able to use the property for that particular use. So you can see the CBDC. There's a lot of limitations on housing, but if you look down here, a lot of the civic activities you're allowed to do just kind of by right, it's called, where you're just allowed to do it because that's part of the ordinance. You don't need any conditional use permit. Um, so this one is the difference between dash C and dash R seems to be these are for residential. This is kind of a more residential zoning, and this is a more commercial zoning, which you can see is reflected in what you need to do to use it for those particular activities. So let's look at another one. So you can see here, so this is the downtown area. You see a lot of CBD designations. Um, you see, let's see what S14 is, or S13. So you can see here, actually, let's look a little closer here. It's nice that they superimpose the aerial view of what's actually there. So you can see here, there's a parking lot here. This parcel is a parking lot, but it has this S14 designation. So let's see what that is. So it looks like this is an example of a parcel that has a particular zoning. So it looks like this is it's allowed, you can build housing here, okay? But right now the use is for a basically a parking lot. Okay, so you can see here that it's just a parking lot, but the zoning allows you to build housing here. Okay, so um, perhaps a developer is going to look at this and be like, hey, this right now is this being used as a parking lot. The highest and best use of it could be to build housing there. Now, there's going to be a ton of factors that are involved. Maybe there's some restrictions. This S14 designation, we'd have to do a little more research as to exactly what it means, but this could be a case where a developer is going to see this, and assuming the kind of conditions are ripe for this to happen, might buy this parcel, get rid of the parking lot, and build more housing. So this is kind of how zoning works. It's the city may have changed the zoning for this because they want more housing in the downtown area, and so they took this existing parking lot, which may have had a different zoning designation 15, 20 years ago, and they've changed it to allow for this new use. Okay, so this is how zoning is a constantly evolving process. A city is going to reevaluate its plan depending on what the needs are in the given kind of current environment. So let's just look at one more. Let's just go to a residential area. So if you see here, this is the part of Oakland that's all kind of residential. So you can see there's different residential zoning, RM3, RM1. So these RM1, I kind of can already kind of guess is a single family home. So basically, you're only allowed to put like one main house on the lot. RM3, I'm assuming this little block right here, these are apartment buildings where it's a higher density of use. So you can see this zone here, if you were to buy, it's cut along a particular parcel here. So if you were to buy, this is 21st Street. So if you were to buy 1926 21st Street, you're going to be in a different zone than the house just right next door at 1940. Okay. And so if you bought 1926 and wanted to build an apartment building, you probably wouldn't be able to, or you'd have to go jump through a bunch of hoops to do it because it's not zoned for that. Right. But if you had just bought the house right next door, it looks like it's already built as an apartment, but this whole block here is already apartments because it's zoned for that. So this is why the parcel map and the zoning map need to kind of be, and now you can see here that they've kind of superimposed them on each other, so it's pretty easy to use. But you need to really be sure about what zone your parcel falls into if you want to do a particular kind of use for it that's different than what it's already being used for. Okay, so let's keep moving on here. So subdivision regulation. So we had talked about how parcels are of different sizes, where you might have one parcel that's 6,000 square feet and has just one house on it, while on the outskirts of town you may have a 20-acre parcel. Okay, so subdivision regulation is the regulation that goes into taking that 20-acre parcel and basically subdividing it into smaller parcels that you can sell kind of to individuals. Okay, so for example, if a large home builder, Lennar, okay, this is a national home builder. Let's say they bought that 20-acre parcel and they're going to build, whatever, 100 houses on it. They need to split that one parcel, which is 20 acres, into 100 small parcels. And so there's going to be some regulation as to how you do that. Each jurisdiction is going to have their own rules of maybe having a minimum lot size, how to go about rezoning it because maybe when Lennar bought it, it was agricultural zone, but now they're building houses, so they're gonna have to kind of rezone it to residential use and then kind of manage that subdivision based on the regulations of the particular jurisdiction they're in. Even within cities that are already developed, you may find larger parcels that are maybe an acre, and you want to split it into four different parcels and sell four different houses. Maybe there's one house on this big lot, and now you want to split that up into four, and then build four houses. And oftentimes developers will do this because um, the land, especially in like high value areas, uh, building four houses on small lots is going to be worth more than just having one house on a large lot. So a developer is going to try to do this lot split subdivision kind of development, which is often lucrative in especially high value areas where real estate is expensive. Okay, next we have building codes. So this is going to be regulation on the construction of the infrastructure and the buildings that go on a site. And so the government usually, there's a state uh, building code, and then, sometimes local governments will add on to that. But basically, there's a minimum building standard that is going to be required, and there's going to be an inspection. So the, the city or the county or whatever is the government that's in charge of a particular jurisdiction that you're building in, as you're building your structure, they're going to send an inspector out at each stage of construction to verify that you are building up to the building code. And so it's important for contractors who are kind of building to know the code and make sure that the structure that they're making is up to that code. And the idea for the building code is to just assure that each building that's constructed in the jurisdiction is up to some minimum kind of safety standards and construction quality standard. Now, the building code has grown over time. Now it includes things like, having to have certain amount of, uh, solar or green energy. It limits the amount of windows you can have because the more windows you have, the more sunlight comes in your house and the more energy inefficient it is, unless you get kind of upgraded windows, in which case, there's all these environmental efficiency standards that exist. Um, and so some may argue that the building code has just made buildings much more expensive than they could have been, and it's not really increasing the quality or the durability per se of the property. So, this is one case where maybe regulation has started off with good intentions, but has metastasized into something that maybe is not in the best interest of society as a whole. Environmental regulation. So we talked about CEQA in a previous video. There's going to be state laws. There's going to be local laws that kind of regulate what kind of environmental impact a development can have. And then finally, we have historical preservation regulations. So these are usually local government laws that want to protect the uh, aesthetics of a particular place and especially the historical landmarks of the place. So, for example, I just know because I live in Sacramento that there are a number of Victorian houses that are in downtown Sacramento. And so some of them are protected by historical preservation regulation, where if you were to buy it, you couldn't significantly alter the outside, or you'd have to maintain the same look. So, for example, if the windows were single pane and they kind of had some decorative elements, you couldn't replace them with the modern window. You'd have to hire a glass professional to come and kind of keep the same uh, style that the existing glass is in. Or if there's some, if even if the outside was rotting, if it's wood, you had some kind of decorative features of the house that were rotting, you couldn't just replace it and put in kind of a more modern look and feel. You'd have to preserve the aesthetics of the house. So those buildings that are protected, or in the case of these Victorian houses, they were much, much, much more expensive to kind of fix up if they were falling into this historical preservation designation. Not all the houses were. So this was one thing. If you were an investor, was to check to see whether your uh, the house you were looking to buy fell under this regulation or not. And I mentioned also the Penn versus New York City case, that Supreme Court case, where Penn Station was designated as a historical landmark. So it's not just like homes that are like small buildings; it could be large buildings. Now, some may argue that historically things have always been changing, and to try to stop progress, stop the change of style and aesthetics is maybe not the best kind of strategy, and hasn't maybe been the historical norm. But some argue that you want to preserve the history of a place, and that's important. So again, this is just there's trade-offs to this policy too.